Phil Bourque of the Penguins on the line with us. Our conversation brought to you by Marcus & Mack, a law firm representing injured people. He is the old 2-9er, and Phil is on the line with us this morning. Phil, good morning.
Hey, good morning to you. How you doing?
Wonderful. It's good to have you on the air with us today. Normally, I want to be talking about the Penguins. I need to be seeing a little breakout led by Letang, hitting Crosby up the ice, and we're coming out and breaking out on a face-off or on a power play. That's not happening now this year. It must feel really weird to you.
Oh, it is weird. I think you probably have the same trees and foliage and everything around your area as we do here in Pittsburgh. And I'm just the one thing I remember this time of year is I had a giant dogwood tree right outside my bedroom window when I was a player. And I remember the 1st of April, it would start to bloom those white flowers. I know you know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
They're everywhere around Pennsylvania.
I actually have one right outside my bedroom window. It's in blossom right now.
And that's the one thing that reminded me is playoff time, because right around the middle of April, that tree would start blooming and the weather would get warmer and we'd have warmer days, cooler nights, the whole thing. So yes, I mean that's a long-winded answer to your short question, but yes, it's very strange, very weird to see those trees blooming and to not be going to the rink in short sleeves and the anticipation of what this team could do. And it's an odd time that we're in, not only sports-wise, but in the matter of life and for some people, life and death situations. And at times you wake up and think this isn't real. It's going to get better quicker than it has been. And it's as far as hockey, it's strange because the Penguins have made the playoffs 13 straight years, and usually this time of year, we're talking about hockey and we're talking about the ups and downs and the ebbs and flows of playoff hockey, and it's weird not to.
We're sure hoping we get back to it at some point. This team seems to be built pretty well for a playoff run, does it not?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And the possibility of getting Jake Gensel back in the lineup and the trades that the Penguins made, that Jimmy Rutherford made towards the deadline, it gets you really excited. And to think about what could happen with this team being completely healthy, which is really unbelievable when I say this. The Penguins were healthy for all of 2 periods all year. It was back in the game in November against the Edmonton Oilers. I think Patrick Hornquist ended up getting hurt in the 3rd period, and they had never had a game being completely healthy. So what this team could do completely healthy if they get the goaltending from Matt Murray, you don't want to get ahead of yourself or get too overly excited. But, I mean, this Penguin team is built to win and win now, and they have as good a chance as anybody to raise the Stanley Cup if we play this year.
Well, Sully would just love to be faced with the problem of what do I do? Gensel's back now, and I got Zucker, and I got all these guys I got to fit in the lineup, and they all have great skill. That'd be a nice problem to have, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, it would be. And yeah, with Zucker and Crosby, and you got Patrick Marleau, who's never won a Stanley Cup, and 40 years of age, he'd be hungry, chomping at the bit. If Guinea Malkin would be. They'd have the other problem would be you'd have guys, like possibly a Dominic Simone or a Nick Bjugstad that possibly could be sitting on the sidelines as a healthy scratch. But it's a good problem to have this time of year for sure.
Yeah, it really is. All right, so normally in a playoff year, you're coming into the Stanley Cup playoffs, you're beat up from the regular season, and you might be bruised a little bit, might be skating with some pretty significant injuries, but it's the playoffs, so you're going. This year, if they do start up again at some point, and they do start up with right into the playoffs, think about what a challenge that would be. That would be really difficult, to be playing at playoff intensity right off the bat, but it'd also be different because you're not as banged up as you would be.
No, you're right. So there's a couple ways to answer that question, and we're still not sure, if we do play. I shouldn't say that. When we do play, I'm pretty sure that we are going to play. It might be August, maybe it's September before we play. But if we do play, you're right. I've tried to put myself in that position right now of, how do I stay ready, and will I be ready enough, and what am I going to feel like? And I think the same is for whether you're, a fourth-line mucker and grinder type of guy, or you're Sidney Crosby. That, I'm sure there's a little bit of doubt thinking, man, I don't know if I'm going to be that sharp. I don't know if I'm going to be that good. I'm worried about, how how I'm going to be ready for this. And the toughest thing in hockey is to stay game ready, because you can't duplicate in anything you do in the gym or working out or duplicate game situations. So how do you do that? How do you stay the most ready? I mean, go out in the driveway and stick handle and shoot pucks. You can do all that. Rollerblades are probably the closest thing to getting yourself game ready and getting out on the road or on the track or somewhere where you can just simulate using those hockey muscles, because they're different than anything else. I remember I'd be in the gym and I would run and I would bike and I would do all this stuff cardio-wise. Mm-hmm. Then I'd put my skates on and go through a practice and be like, I'm gassed. I feel like crap. Why do I've been working out so hard. It's just hockey is different. Skating is different than anything else you can do. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of guys that are trying to, use unique types of workouts to get themselves ready as possible.
Yeah, and you think about it, after this long layoff, they'd have to go through probably a pretty extensive training camp type of atmosphere. And they'd have 17 healthy forwards. There'd be some really, really intense play during those, because guys are fighting for playing time now.
No, you're right. And, when we come out of this break, what's the format going to be? I've heard a couple different things. I've heard that they're going to actually try to finish the rest of the regular season. You have a couple teams that have played 78 games, and you've got, I think, 8 teams that have played 81 games. So you still have a little bit of schedule left here. Let me correct myself. It's 68 games and then 71 games. But there's 82 games in a normal regular season, so there's a little bit left of track left here to try to finish the regular season. And the others go right into the playoffs. Now, it's the scariest thing for all these players to get probably a 3-week training camp, which is a pretty substantial time, really, to get yourself ready. But still, to go into that playoff atmosphere where it's just guns a-blazing, I think there's a lot of players in the National Hockey League that they're not sure if they're going to be ready for that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. All right, so let's think back a little bit, because yesterday the Penguins put a great photo on their website of you and Ari and Loney around the Stanley Cup, and you were celebrating in the locker room right afterwards in the dressing room. And it really reminded me that when you get to the playoffs, there are some guys that pop up as heroes in these Stanley Cup playoffs for a game or for a series that you might not have anticipated, and B, you really need guys who muck it up like you guys did back then, don't you?
I go back to the St. Louis Blues that won last year, the Washington Capitals that won 2 years ago, the Penguins that won in 16 and 17, the Chicago Blackhawks in 15, the LA Kings in 14. As you go back to each of those teams, you're bang on. Exactly right. Every team will tell you the same thing. Yeah, we had high-end talent. Yeah, we had great goaltending. But what won us the Stanley Cup is we had a bunch of guys that were third or fourth line guys. Maybe they at one time they were part of the Black Aces, the extra guys that get plugged into the lineup when there's an injury. Maybe the number 6 defenseman that had 1 goal all year, and then he scores a goal in the playoffs, ends up being an overtime winning goal. Every single team can tell you the same thing. That's what wins you a Stanley Cup, is you got a bunch of guys that have character, and they kind of seize a moment during the playoffs to kind of get you over the hump or get you through a certain game that maybe you didn't deserve to win, but somehow you pulled out of your backside because one of those guys stepped up and made a big play.
You go back to the Stanley Cups in the 90s, the teams on which you were a part. There were some fellas that just stepped up and made amazing things. You think of Peter Angelo on the save, and just everybody that came together to make that happen. There must have been some moments that stood out to you where you said, wow, I didn't know he could do that. Maybe it was even with you.
Yeah, I mean, I remember us being down 3-0 in Game 1 against Chicago, and I scored a goal to make it 3-1, and it kind of gave belief and hope to not only us on the bench, but equally important was the fans got into the game. We ended up winning that game. As you remember, Mario scored late. I think we won 5-4 or 6-5, some crazy score in a Stanley Cup final game. But, yeah, remember Randy Gillen. Do you remember that name?
Oh, yeah.
Big goal in the playoffs in 91. You mentioned Frankie in 91, Frankie Pietrangelo in the save. It goes on. Connor Sherry scoring an overtime winning goal against San Jose in 2016 in overtime. Guys like that stepping up and making big plays, and that's the difference. That's what makes you, I don't know if you're watching this Michael Jordan documentary, but John Paxton hitting a huge shot. Steve Kerr hitting a huge shot. They weren't the star guys. Those guys, those kind of role. You call them muckers and grinders. Exactly what they are. They have the game of their life, or the biggest play ever in their life at that moment to help win the ultimate prize at the highest level of their sport.
So put us on the ice in a Stanley Cup Finals game, and you're a guy like we mentioned, Troy Loney, some of those fellows that were on those teams, and you've got the superstars. You've got Ronnie Francis and Mario, of course, and Yager and all of those. Is there pressure to raise your game, to elevate your game, or do you just have to play your game and they know what your game is too, and you just fit in together?
Yeah, I like that question. I like the way you worded that question. Exactly right. I can remember during the playoffs that I didn't sleep good at night, and I remember either driving to a game at home or taking a taxi to a game on the road, and my stomach was in an absolute knot. If you can think of a moment where maybe you had to give a speech in school or something like that, where you had that moment where you were just absolute nervous wreck. You almost felt like you were going to vomit. I had a bunch of those moments during the playoffs, and yeah, that's those players that are those muckers and grinders. I think they do put more pressure on themselves, and that's why you have that anxiety, and that's why you see them when they win. Those guys probably celebrate harder when they raise that Stanley Cup on the ice because, they got outside their comfort zone. They decided, I'm going to continue to do my job, the stuff that's expected of me, but I'm going to do something more. I'm going to get out. This is the one time I'm going to get outside that comfort zone. I'm going to have confidence. I'm going to have that little bit of swagger, and I'm going to make something special happen. I'm not going to, count on Mario or Kevin Stevens or Ronnie Francis to carry the ball every single game. One of these games, I've got to step up and do something special, and that's what you find on Stanley Cup teams. Yeah,
it really calls to mind as well. Guys like Craig Patrick, Bob Johnson, Scotty Bowman, Jimmy Rutherford today, and Sully. To identify those guys and to put them into position to be successful, that takes a pretty good mind.
It does, and a lot of times those guys don't get talked about. You talk about the players and the great plays that get made, but the way the coaches study film and they walk that tightrope too to be the best coaches they can be without stuffing your mind with too much information when they talk to the players, and managing a bench and not getting caught up in the situation and having a clear head and making that right decision at the right moment, or maybe you change a line a little bit, or have the right player out at the right time and he makes that big play. And that's the one thing I really could appreciate from the two coaches we had in 91 and 92, Badger Bob Johnson, who passed away 6 months after we won the Stanley Cup in 91, and then Scotty Bowman, the winningest coach in NHL history, comes in to replace him. The one common denominator of both these guys is they were great bench coaches. They had great hockey minds, and they did special things in their career that get documented. But the thing that stays with a player the most is how they ran the bench when things were really chaotic and really hectic and really going sideways. How did they reel things back in and get us to where we needed to be? And both those guys had great hockey minds. It would have been great in running a business, because running a hockey bench is a lot like running a business.
Yeah, I always wondered about those conversations on the bench. Hey, our buddy Mark Burdick upstairs says he's ready to go if you need that 18th forward. He says hello.
Well, you know what? I appreciate Mark, and I don't know how good his game is that way on the ice, but I know his golf game is pretty good. So if he wants to get in my pocket again, I'd be more than happy to go out and chase that white ball around with him.
I know his golf game. You don't want to do that. Hey, Phil, thanks so much for spending some time. It's been fun actually talking about hockey today.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed this. Anytime you want to talk again, give me a call. I enjoyed it.
Have a great one. We'll see you.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
There's Phil Bourque, and we talked right up to the marker.